I don't like the typical fitness magazine advice of where they just kind of throw it at you all at once. Drive through heels, like keep your core tight, like brace your belly, and like all the other stuff that is, I think, information overload for the average person, just not necessary. Bros and Blokes says, what are some good cues when it comes to positioning and movement for a barbell back squat? For example, where should the feet be? What's the best grip placement, and so forth? So I asked for more context, and he was basically saying that he's wondering, for the context of someone starting out, he's curious on my take, or if there are cues that he could use with his clients moving forward. So I like to do, my style of coaching is, okay, I have a personal tendency to just information dump too much. And I need to kind of back off of that and use less information, because less is more sometimes, you know what I mean? So like I try to aim more for that, because I know my tendency is just to give too much. Now, that being said, the way I like to coach is with minimal effective dose and just see where people are at, meet them where they're at. So when I'm teaching someone squats or deadlifts, I show them like, if they've never really done it before, I'll show them generally how to do it, and I'll correct very obvious form issues. Other than that, I'm gonna let them kind of do squats and deadlifts as they see fit, and then assess where they're at from there, and then try to change, like, what's the lowest hanging fruit, or what's the maximal impact change that I can give one thing at a time, and not overload them with cues. So that being said, there's a lot of cues out there, and I really do not like the generic cues of stuff like, bro, just drive through the heels. Oh, you're gonna squat, drive through the heels, drive through the heels, drive through heels. And that's all you hear. And I'm just not a fan of that cue, because it's missing a lot of stuff. Driving through heels for the wrong person is gonna make them fall back. Like, you can look this up, it's kind of scary. Like heavy squatting, drive through heels, falling back. Like, that's a thing, because they're focused so much on the wrong thing. So let me start with what I will teach and how I get them to start. And then obvious form issues I might try to spot, and then a couple examples of corrective cues. So starting with squats. With squats, generally have them start with their foot stance somewhere between. I give ranges, because honestly, like, everyone's anatomy and mobility is different. So I start with I give them some sort of range, and then just see what they feel comfortable doing. So foot stance, somewhere between hip width to shoulder width. If they want to go a little bit wider than that, that's fine too. Foot angle should not be straight forward if you're planning on hitting depth, unless you got some really freak anatomy or freak mobility. But most people should have their feet pointed out at least a little bit, somewhere between like 5 degrees to 45 degrees, somewhere in this zone, and also the foot width somewhere. So again, somewhere in this zone to whatever feels comfortable. Now, dialing that in, I don't care so much unless I think there's a problem with stability. Then I'll have them try different foot stances. There's other guides online you can look up about, like, getting on all fours, quadruped, and trying to find the right position. What's your right stance? You can go through those drills if you want to find out, like, what you think your ideal width is, squat width. Anyway, the next general cue is, or general form for deadlifting that I go through is get the hit depth, where basically you're going to about parallel. If you're competing, then you should go a little bit, if you're competing for powerlifting, go a little bit past parallel. Honestly, more range of motion, the better, as long as you can get there safely and you're pain-free and you're not rounding your lower back severely. I mean, a little bit of rounding is fine, but like, if you're trying to go ass to grass and your lower back looks like this, you gotta be asking yourself, why are you going so low? Is it really necessary to go that low? Because it's not a guaranteed injury, like instant injury for having a rounded lower back, but it starts to become a risk injury, like risk reward ratio. The more rounded your lower back is during squats or deadlifts, the bigger the concern is for a potential injury, depending on the person. In my case, I am not resilient. I am pretty likely to get injured having a rounded back. I just know my history, and I know what I'm tolerant of and what I'm not tolerant of. So of course my bias is towards going more towards the neutral spine and trying to avoid any kind of rounded back. So that's another thing. The other thing is for basic form, just making sure that they're hinging at both the knee and the hips. That is, both the hips and the knees should be closing and opening together. So What I mean is, as I'm squatting down, my knee angle is closing and also my hip angle is closing too. I'm hinging, right? So both of these are collapsing together and they're going up together and straightening out. So that's kind of like the basics I have them focus on. And from there, we see what to focus on. So like the other general guiding principles that I use are going for where you feel strongest, usually joints stacked, and getting the best core tightness. So some like more advanced things to think about. Like you're asking about grip placement. I would place grip to where you can feel the tightest and the strongest for your squat. Generally speaking, that's going to be having it really tight. But if it's so tight that it's hurting your wrist because you don't have the mobility, then you got to kind of gauge like, is it really worth it for me to try to work on the mobility? Do I really care about that? How much work do I have to put in? Is it holding back my squats right now? Because there's so many different things you can focus on. Try to improve like your squats or deadlifts. There's almost too much to focus on. And so again, that was an advanced example about like dialing in your grip mobility, especially if you're doing like low back squats versus high back. Low bar squats versus high bar squats. Those are things that I place as like a secondary importance. Just like let them pick whatever they want initially. Because again, yes, lat activation is important for the movement, but I wouldn't put it as that high of an importance compared to like the other stuff I mentioned, which is their starting foot position should be within that zone. Unless they've already discovered that for some reason they do really well with like 2x with like sumo squat style, where like your foot position is super wide relative to your hips and shoulders. So like lat activation I think is important, but I put it like as a lower importance for beginners to focus on. Similar with bench press. Leg drive, I think, is fantastic for bench press and people should use leg drive. However, leg drive I think is advanced and difficult. It's a difficult concept and skill to teach, to where I don't think it's necessary for beginners to really focus on that. Like focus on the most important stuff. Like core bracing, I would focus on the concept of core bracing over focusing on lat activation. Even though lat activation is a part of core bracing, but that's a specific part to the general concept. Makes sense? I start with the most general concept stuff first, and then start zeroing in on things. I don't like telling people specifics for like activate your lats, like feel it in your traps, pull down on the bar. Actually, no, pull down the bar is a more generic cue, but like focusing on lat activation, I don't like zeroing in on that stuff. To me, it's the same as like drive through your heels. Those are corrective. I would view those as corrective cues if the person, if the client or the person trying to squat or deadlift is exhibiting issues where it's kind of obvious they need some correction there, and then I would give them a specific cue. So the cue is like, what do you think about to get that mind muscle connection? What do you think about to execute the lift? Because take for example like deadlifts. You're working your posterior chain, which is your backside. So you're wearing, in particular, your low back, your spinal erectors, which is like the two pillars of muscle that follows your spine, the glutes, and hamstrings. Those are the major movers that are contracting and lengthening. You've also got pretty much the entire body as an isometric hold, where you're trying to like tense the muscles to get tight, and then you're holding. Like for example, your traps and your lats, they're not really lengthening, extending, but are contracting and lengthening, but they are getting tight, right? So they're still being used. So for the deadlift, I forgot I was going with this. I had a brain fart just now. We were talking about deadlift position and cues. So if on a deadlift for the cue, like you're using all those muscles, but it does not mean you should be individually thinking about every single muscle. If you're doing a simple bicep curl, or like, actually take for one of my favorite examples, triceps. If you're doing like certain tricep movements, like let's say you have a machine, you have a cable, and you're just, pushing down, the grip position that you choose for like pronated, palms facing down, versus neutral, versus supinated or palms facing up, that's going to change what the focus is on the head. And so in that sense, yes, I would focus on cueing, like, yeah, really feel it in the lateral head or the medial head or the long head of the tricep as you're doing it. Like you're doing the supinated grip, yeah, feel it in the long head, right? Those kinds of cues I don't think make sense for heavy compound movements. Heavy compound movements is better to focus on a single cue or two, maybe three, but like whatever it is to get you in position. So for example, for squats, the balance should feel like, you should feel like you are balanced over your midfoot. That is, the center of your weight feels like it's over the middle of your foot. It's not too far forward where you feel like you're falling forward, not too far back where you're going to drive through your heels and fall back. So if the person is exhibiting issues where they're saying like, yeah, I'm experiencing knee pain on the front or the top of my knee, and I'm looking at them and it seems like they're tipping forward too much and like they're almost coming off their heels, then their center of gravity is too far forward. So how do we correct that? We can use corrective cues such as drive through your heels. And in that person's case, I would say drive through your heels, drive through your heels. Same example with me. Actually, I did use drive through my heels for my deadlift. The bar, I was a little bit too far forward, shoulder blades a little bit too far forward, and also the bar colliding with my knees slightly on the way up. So a corrective cue for me was also like, I used two different cues to kind of do that. Drive through heels is okay, because that was helping me get my knees out of the way sooner. And the second cue I actually liked better was pull knees back. So that one worked better for me in terms of getting my knees out of the way, which was pull my knees back. And also I used some different cues to set up. So anyway, so bros and blokes, hope that helps. Again, I choose the style of let's pick a broad set of guidelines that will encompass like 95% of the population and then zero in on stuff depending on the person's problems. I don't like the typical fitness magazine advice of where they just kind of throw it at you all at once. Drive through heels, like keep your core tight, like brace your belly, and like all the other stuff that is, I think, information overload for the average person, just not necessary. If you like the content, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Also, follow us on Twitch and leave the notifications on. Feed your brain, feed your body, and see you next time.